Today, our two countries face a multitude of more complex threats, emanating from multiple directions. As friends and as allies, we face them together. These challenges know no borders. No fortress can protect us against them this time. Instead, the answer lies in the Princess of Wales.
A single toast at Buckingham Palace turned into a prophecy and left the world questioning the future of the monarchy. It began on a summer evening in July 2025, under the vaulted ceilings of Buckingham Palace, where the air hung thick with history and expectation. The UK and France, once allies, then rivals, and now uneasy partners in the wake of Brexit, faced a delicate dance of diplomacy. Every gesture, every word spoken that night carried weight far beyond the golden ballroom walls. Whispers from both camps had already cast this state visit as a test not just of political resilience, but of the monarchy's ability to remain relevant in an increasingly fractured world. As the guests arrived, a quiet tension shimmered beneath the grandeur. French President Emmanuel Macron carried with him a reputation for sharp wit and sharper strategy. For King Charles, this was more than hosting a foreign leader. It was an opportunity to signal that the crown still held sway in matters of statecraft, even in a modern age. Yet it wasn't the king who sat squarely at the center of attention that night. At the banquet's head table, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, sat beside Macron, a placement so deliberate it drew a collective gasp from seasoned courtiers and foreign dignitaries alike. The symmetry was striking. A future queen alongside the French president, their proximity a quiet proclamation of her growing importance. This was no ceremonial fluke, no empty gesture. The murmurs in the room swelled when King Charles, standing to make his toast, glanced at Catherine with unmistakable pride and declared, half in jest but wholly intentional, "She replaces me from now on." The phrase landed like a thunderclap, reverberating through the room, then out into the waiting world as whispers morphed into headlines. Social media erupted within minutes, speculating about the meaning behind his words. Was it simply affection? Or had Charles just signaled a seismic shift in royal strategy? Posts called it everything from a subtle abdication to a masterstroke of modern monarchy. For those watching, it was impossible to ignore the glint in his eye, the hint of something more than just paternal admiration. Catherine, perfectly poised yet visibly moved, dipped her head slightly at his words, as though she, too, understood the magnitude of what had just been said. Cameras caught Macron leaning back, eyes narrowing with interest, perhaps realizing that the woman beside him was no longer just a royal consort, but a diplomatic force being unveiled before his very eyes. Across the globe, viewers began to question what role Catherine would now play in the monarchy's future. Had Charles truly entrusted her with something greater than ceremony, perhaps even the very survival of the crown itself in the modern age? But what truly happened that night, and why did Catherine's presence redefine the monarchy's path? Let's unravel the moment that stunned even seasoned royals. Behind the glittering chandeliers of Buckingham Palace, a quiet revolution was brewing, and all eyes turned to Catherine. The banquet had all the trappings of royal tradition: gleaming silver, polished crystal, and the hush of centuries, old etiquette echoing through the room. But beneath its dazzling surface, something darker pulsed the weight of fractured alliances, frayed trust, and the urgent need to remind the world that the monarchy still mattered. As French and British dignitaries filed into their seats, there was no mistaking the strain between them. Brexit's bitter aftertaste still lingered, casting a shadow over the evening's carefully rehearsed civility. Diplomats whispered about failed trade talks, aides darted through side doors with worried expressions, and a thin tension coiled through the air like an unspoken challenge. Then came the moment that silenced even the whispers. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, took her seat beside Emmanuel Macron. The symmetry of that placement was impossible to ignore, and the shock was immediate. Courtiers, who prided themselves on their composure, exchanged quick, furtive glances. This was not merely a matter of protocol. The seat she occupied was more than a position of honor. It was a statement. Online commentators seized on it instantly, noting the calculated elegance of placing the future queen alongside one of Europe's most formidable leaders. Posts began circulating, questioning whether this was just a symbolic gesture or a signal of something deeper. For centuries, the toast at such a banquet had been the monarch's privilege, a ritual, but also a show of authority. And yet, that night, the eyes of Britain and France alike watched as Catherine rose to deliver those words. There was no falter in her voice, no sign of nerves as she took her place where kings and queens before her had stood. Guests leaned in as she spoke, her tone poised yet charged with quiet strength. Even those who had doubted her felt the room shift as she spoke, a subtle but undeniable transfer of gravity toward her. What struck those present most was not just her command of the words, but the calm dignity that clung to her throughout. Where others might have appeared rehearsed, she was simply resolute, her composure almost disarming. Diplomats, hardened by years of high-stakes negotiations, found themselves nodding in approval at her measured cadence, her ability to soften the sharp edges of the evening without diminishing its importance. Macron himself, a man known for his guarded expressions and meticulous control, found his reserve tested. As she spoke, he leaned toward her ever so slightly, his features softening into what could only be described as respect, and perhaps something more. There was recognition in his gaze, as though he too understood that this was no mere performance. It was a declaration. But how did she manage to navigate the high-stakes moment with such grace, and why did Charles trust her with this critical responsibility? It wasn't just a toast, it was a silent coronation of a different kind. For months, perhaps even years, Charles had been quietly sketching the outlines of a monarchy fit for the 21st century. Beneath the formal ceremonies and carefully staged appearances, his mind had been fixed on one question: how to preserve the crown's relevance without shattering its traditions. The world had grown impatient with pomp and symbolism. The public wanted more than smiling waves and polished speeches. They wanted authenticity, strength, and someone who could bridge the chasm between the past and the future. Charles knew the monarchy's survival depended on more than his own reign. The burden of modernizing it would not be his alone to carry. As he watched public sentiment shift and old certainties crumble in the face of scrutiny, he began looking beyond himself toward a younger generation who could carry his vision forward. But he also knew that passing the torch required more than familial love. It required confidence in their ability to endure the brutal pressures that came with it. Among all the contenders, Catherine stood apart. Her journey into the royal fold had been anything but easy. From her earliest days, she endured relentless examination, her every gesture picked apart by those who doubted her worthiness. But quietly, persistently, she learned. Through years of unassuming work, visiting hospitals, listening to stories of pain and resilience, championing causes that touched lives far from the gilded palaces, she crafted a role uniquely her own. Behind closed doors, Charles began to notice. He watched how she connected with people effortlessly, how she absorbed protocol and diplomacy as though she'd been born to it. Their private conversations grew longer, more pointed. He tested her with hypothetical scenarios, gauged her instincts, and noted the ways she balanced grace with resolve. In her, he began to see a future where the monarchy could trust a bridge between the rigid traditions he'd inherited and the modern expectations pressing in from outside. So when the Macron banquet approached, Charles knew what he was asking of her. He understood it was not simply a seat at the table but a crucible, a moment to prove, beyond any doubt, that she could hold the monarchy's weight. And she did. She didn't just perform the role, she transformed it, elevating the evening beyond ceremonial necessity into a show of strength and hope. Every word she spoke, every quiet smile, was evidence of the trust he had placed in her and her unflinching ability to justify it. Yet, this triumph wasn't merely about royal pageantry, it was about strategy, timing, and Catherine's unspoken gift for diplomacy. With one toast, she disarmed a president, charmed a nation, and left the palace buzzing with whispers of destiny. As Catherine's words echoed through the grand hall, a subtle but undeniable shift rippled through the room. Macron, renowned for his sharp mind and sharper tongue, found himself caught off guard not by a clever retort or political maneuver, but by the grace and conviction in her delivery. His guarded expression softened, his head tilted slightly, as though he was truly seeing her for the first time. In that instant, she had accomplished what no trade delegation, no formal agreement could. She had earned not only his attention but his respect. It was not long before the first test arrived. A murmur from a guest about the Brexit impasse drew the entire room into a tense silence. The air thickened, the smiles froze. This was the kind of question that could derail even the most seasoned diplomat, yet Catherine didn't flinch. With an ease that betrayed none of the pressure pressing down on her, she steered the conversation deftly toward shared Anglo-French cultural ties, highlighting a recent art exhibition that had captivated both nations. The tension dissolved almost immediately, replaced by quiet nods and even a ripple of laughter. Where others might have stumbled, she had turned potential disaster into an opportunity for connection. Macron leaned toward her then, an approving smile breaking his otherwise controlled demeanor. Later, in private, he reportedly murmured to his aides, "She is a bridge between nations." That phrase would not remain behind closed doors for long. Within hours, it spread through diplomatic circles, whispered like a prophecy, as though even he recognized that something larger than a single evening was unfolding before him. And it wasn't just Macron who felt it. All around the table, guests exchanged knowing glances. Even Charles, a man rarely inclined to reveal his emotions so openly, allowed himself a faint but unmistakable smile as he caught Catherine's eye. The connection between them was impossible to miss, a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement of the trust they shared, the bond forged in countless conversations and private preparations. That single glance between them carried the weight of everything left unsaid. She was ready. It was no longer a question of whether she could fill the role. The real question now was how far she could take it. The room buzzed long after the applause faded, courtiers and diplomats alike wondering what this meant for the future. Catherine had not simply performed a duty that night. She had planted a flag in new territory, proving she could navigate the storm and bring others with her. But her mastery that night wasn't born overnight. It was years in the making, shaped by quiet determination and resilience. Every quiet moment of learning, every scrutinized appearance, led her to this defining point. Catherine's path to that unforgettable banquet was never paved with ease or indulgence. From the beginning, her entry into the royal family was met with skepticism, even outright disdain from those who couldn't see beyond her so-called commoner background. Every smile she offered was dissected, every step analyzed, every misstep magnified under a cruel and relentless spotlight. She endured headlines that questioned her worth, whispers in corridors doubting her resilience, and a public that waited to see if she would crumble. Yet through it all, she stood not loudly, not defiantly, but with a quiet determination that only became visible when it mattered most. It was during those years of constant scrutiny that she began to craft her true strength. Her work with mental health charities revealed a depth of empathy that few had expected. She sat with survivors, listened to children who had lost their way, and lent her voice to causes that were all too often silenced. With every visit, she learned to navigate the fragile space between formality and authenticity, between duty and humanity. She became a patron of early years initiatives, not for the photo opportunities, but because she believed in the transformative power of nurturing childhood. Her involvement in addiction recovery further demonstrated her willingness to confront uncomfortable realities with grace and conviction. These choices, often unglamorous, built her credibility brick by brick. All the while, Charles watched. Their conversations, sometimes in drawing rooms, sometimes walking through palace gardens, became lessons in diplomacy and statecraft. He tested her patience and her instincts, forcing her to see the world not just through compassion, but through strategy. She learned how to read a room, how to sense when to speak and when to remain silent, and how to recognize opportunity buried beneath conflict. Slowly, she became not just his daughter-in-law, but his confidant and his pupil. And behind her studied calm lay the examples of two towering figures who came before her. She often spoke of how she studied Queen Elizabeth II's ability to project unwavering strength without words, to convey dignity without distance. But it was Diana who taught her the power of vulnerability, how to touch hearts not by perfection, but by showing humanity even in the face of pain. Catherine carried these lessons like armor and compass, learning how to blend the best of both legacies into something uniquely her own. By the time she stood at that banquet table, she had learned to walk the thin line between tradition and authenticity, to embody the monarchy's gravitas while remaining deeply relatable. It was a balance only she could strike, because she had forged it herself through countless trials. And while the banquet marked a professional triumph, it was the personal moments that revealed the depth of her strength and vision. Behind the sapphire gown and polished words lies a mother, a wife, and an unwavering heart. As Catherine stood at the center of a moment that would be written into history, she never lost sight of the quiet truths that anchored her. Even as the room hung on her every word, and courtiers whispered her name with newfound reverence, her thoughts kept returning home to the children she had kissed goodbye only hours earlier. That night, the weight of two worlds pressed upon her shoulders. The expectations of an ancient monarchy and the tender pull of motherhood. and she carried them both with grace. Long after the toasts had been made, and the applause subsided into conversation, she found a discreet moment to slip away and place a call home. Those who glimpsed it say it was not the action of a princess trying to perform, but of a mother simply needing to know her children were well. That small gesture, unseen by most but felt by all who understood her, became a quiet testament to the kind of strength that no title could bestow. It was this ability to remain wholly herself, even in the grandeur of a gilded room, that drew others to her and made them believe in her. William, seated just far enough away to observe her fully, watched with a mix of awe and something deeper, a pride that softened even his usually measured demeanor. He knew better than anyone what it had taken for her to stand there so unshaken. And as she met his gaze across the room, their eyes spoke what words never could, a silent vow that whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together. In that glance, the weight of the crown seemed lighter, shared between them in a way no protocol could command. Even the most seasoned courtiers could not ignore what they witnessed that evening. Many of them, hardened by decades of royal routine, found themselves quietly moved by her ability to remain grounded. To them, she wasn't simply playing a part, she was redefining it. One aide later confessed that in that moment, they realized she was no longer just supporting the institution, she was becoming its very heartbeat. And still, she never faltered. Through every toast, every knowing smile, every soft word exchanged with Macron, she carried herself as though she belonged not because she had been born into it, but because she had earned it. But as applause filled the ballroom, the palace itself seemed to sense a profound shift was underway, and whispers of a royal document began circulating. Amid the clinking glasses, a quiet rumor spread that one could redefine the monarchy itself. Some whispers begin like a faint breeze, barely noticeable until you realize the entire room has shifted. That evening, as the guests exchanged pleasantries and laughter masked the weight of history, pressing against the walls, another kind of conversation took root, subtle, persistent, impossible to ignore. Behind the polite smiles and courteous bows, aides and courtiers began murmuring about a document. A draft, they said. A royal declaration being prepared to formalize Catherine's role beyond anything previously imagined. No one could confirm its contents outright, but its very existence sent ripples of speculation through the palace. They spoke of a plan that would place her squarely at the forefront of diplomacy, not merely as a figurehead or consort, but as a strategic player in the crown's global dealings. Whispers suggested it was Charles's answer to the monarchy's survival in a world that no longer bowed automatically to tradition. Catherine, they said, would not just inherit history, she would shape it, and though the ink on that mysterious document remained unseen by most, the weight of its potential was already reshaping expectations. Outside the palace, the reaction was even more startling. As news of her commanding presence at the banquet filtered into public consciousness, headlines captured the mood with growing excitement. Words like trailblazer, future, and even queen in waiting dominated social media, painting her not just as a symbol of continuity, but as the heart of a reimagined monarchy. Videos of her toast flooded platforms, with countless users marveling at her composure and calling her the very soul of the evening. Commentators who once dismissed her as cautious or conventional now admitted she was something entirely different, a bridge between what the monarchy had been and what it needed to become. Even the harshest voices softened, acknowledging that she carried herself with a conviction that no title could bestow. One post captured the sentiment perfectly: she's not just part of the monarchy, she's becoming the monarchy. Meanwhile, those who understood the intricacies of palace power could see the deeper strategy unfolding. This was not happening. Charles had been crafting this vision quietly, and Catherine was at its center. Her ability to earn trust in rooms filled with both allies and skeptics was not just valuable, it was essential. And the more she proved herself, the clearer it became that she was not only his choice, but the monarchy's inevitable future. And while the document remains behind palace walls, Catherine's influence has already begun shaping the monarchy's next chapter. Her influence spans not just borders, but generations, redefining what it means to serve. Catherine had already proven she could captivate a room of statesmen and soften even the sharpest of foreign leaders. But what set her apart was not just her ability to operate on the grand stage, it was her uncanny skill at straddling two worlds. She spoke with the authority of a diplomat, yet carried herself with the intimacy of someone who still understood the quiet struggles of everyday people. That duality was her secret weapon. and it became increasingly clear that her presence could no longer be confined to a supporting role. That night, as she conversed easily with Macron about shared challenges, something larger began to take shape. He, who so rarely revealed admiration, nodded thoughtfully as she spoke of new initiatives, an Anglo-French education program to inspire youth on both sides of the Channel, and a potential climate partnership that combined Britain's innovation with France's environmental ambitions. The ideas were not hers alone, but it was her charm and vision that made them seem not just possible, but inevitable. These were not just words exchanged over dinner. They were seeds planted for alliances that could endure far beyond a single reign. Yet even as she shaped these monumental ideas, her thoughts returned to a smaller, more personal mission, preparing the next generation who would inherit the weight of this history. George, Charlotte, and Louis were not in the ballroom that night, but they were very much present in her mind. Those closest to her knew she was already teaching them lessons not written in any royal handbook. That service must be earned, that humility commands more respect than entitlement, and that true leadership lies in listening before speaking. In many ways, she was laying the foundation for a monarchy that would look very different from the one she had inherited, and the public could feel it. Indeed, the people watching from afar no longer saw her as just the consort of a future king. To them, she had become the embodiment of what the monarchy needed to be: resilient, compassionate, relatable, yet unflinching when it mattered. Their devotion to her swelled with each passing day, their confidence in her eclipsing even some who were born to rule. She was no longer merely filling a role, she was defining it. And through it all, she maintained the balance others struggled to find. One moment she was negotiating potential policies with world leaders, the next she was quietly checking on her children, making sure bedtime routines hadn't been forgotten. That juxtaposition of the ability to navigate between the grandeur of statecraft and the intimacy of family became her hallmark, a living reminder that leadership without humanity was hollow. As the world watched her that night, it became clear she was not just waiting for the crown, she is already forging her legacy. As Charles raised his glass, the torch of the monarchy was quietly passed, and history was made. The room fell silent as King Charles stood, his glass held high, the weight of his words hanging in the air even before they were spoken. All eyes turned to him, but his gaze rested squarely on Catherine. The pride in his expression was unmistakable, yet behind it lay something more: the solemn acknowledgement of a transition long in the making. When he finally spoke, his voice carried not just warmth, but conviction. He toasted her not as his daughter-in-law, nor simply as the Princess of Wales, but as the future of the monarchy itself. Those words, delivered with quiet certainty, marked a turning point no one dared to deny. Macron, seated nearby, leaned forward as if to punctuate the moment, offering his own tribute to Catherine's extraordinary poise and vision. He spoke of her ability to foster trust, of the bridge she had already begun to build between nations. Coming from a man known for his guarded diplomacy, it was praise that carried weight beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. His acknowledgement made clear to everyone present and to the watching world that this was not just a ceremony, it was strategy, it was destiny. Yet, it was the unspoken moments that spoke the loudest. Charles's eyes shimmered with pride, as though he was finally witnessing the fulfillment of a plan he had carefully nurtured. William, sitting just beyond Catherine, wore an expression of awe mingled with reverence, a quiet recognition that she had claimed a place in history that was wholly her own. And Catherine herself remained serene, the faintest trace of emotion flickering in her gaze, though her composure never faltered. Her strength was quiet but unyielding, radiating far beyond the confines of the banquet. Around the world, reactions poured in almost instantly. Commentators called her more than a figurehead now, framing her as a strategist, a diplomat, a leader in her own right. Headlines declared her not simply the future queen, but the architect of the monarchy's survival. In the span of a single evening, she had shattered expectations, proving that she was capable not only of upholding tradition but of reinventing it. And as the night wore on, whispers of her next steps grew louder. Some speculated she would soon appear at global summits, advocating for initiatives that reached far beyond British borders. Others imagined her spearheading cultural exchanges, breathing new life into alliances the monarchy had once let wither. What was certain, however, was that she had already become the center of something much bigger, a movement toward a monarchy that was not only seen, but felt. In that glittering ballroom, beneath the weight of history, Catherine didn't just honor tradition, she began to rewrite it. And this is only the beginning. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.